A body was found on a beach. In the pocket of a dead man, police discovered a clue that should have solved everything. But instead, that clue opened a door to a mystery so strange, so impossible, that it has never been solved. The man had no identification. His face matched no missing person. His fingerprints existed nowhere in any database. Every label in his clothing had been carefully removed. Every marking that could identify him had been erased. He was a ghost made flesh, a person who should not exist. And when police finally found the one piece of evidence that they thought would crack the case wide open, it only deepened the mystery. No name, no origin, no answers, just a body, a code, and questions that have haunted investigators for over 70 years. Imagine discovering that someone died in your city, and despite every effort, every resource, every tool of modern investigation, no one can figure out who they were or why they were there. That's not supposed to be possible. In the modern world, everyone leaves traces, everyone has a history, everyone can be identified, except this man. Today we're diving into one of the most baffling cases in criminal history, a death that should have been simple to solve, but instead became an enigma that has frustrated police, fascinated cryptographers, and spawned countless theories. This is the story of the Somerton Man, the unidentified body found on an Australian beach in 1948, carrying a secret message that no one has ever been able to decode. This case will show you how sometimes, despite all our technology and expertise, some mysteries are designed never to be solved, and it will make you wonder whether this man's identity was hidden by accident or by careful, deliberate design. To understand why this case became such an embarrassment to the police and why it remains unsolved, we need to go back to December 1948 in Adelaide, Australia. This was the immediate post-war period. Just 3 years after World War II had ended, the world was still adjusting to peace. But it was an uneasy peace. The Cold War was beginning. Tensions between the Soviet Union and the West were escalating. Espionage was rampant. Intelligence agencies were recruiting agents, running operations, and eliminating threats in ways the public would never know about. Australia, despite being far from the centers of European and American power, was not isolated from this shadow war. The country had strategic importance. American military installations were being established, and intelligence operations were active throughout the region. This is crucial context because many of the theories about the Somerton Man involve espionage, coded messages, and the kind of covert activities that were commonplace in that era. At the same time, police investigation techniques in 1948 were far more limited than they would become just a few decades later. Fingerprint analysis existed, but databases were incomplete and not computerized. DNA testing was decades away from being invented. International cooperation between police forces was slow and difficult. If someone wanted to disappear, if someone wanted to create a new identity or erase an old one, it was far easier then than it would be today. The Adelaide police force was competent but small, dealing with a city of a few 100,000 people where serious crime was relatively rare. They were not prepared for a case like this, a case that would require international investigation, cryptographic analysis, and the kind of resources that simply were not available to a regional Australian police department. This was also an era when people accepted official explanations more readily. If the police said they could not identify someone, the public generally believed them and moved on. There was no internet, no amateur sleuths sharing theories online, no way for ordinary people to access information and conduct their own investigations. The Somerton Man case would haunt the police precisely because they could not provide answers, and the lack of answers made them look incompetent, made them look like they were hiding something, made people wonder if there was a conspiracy to keep the truth buried. The man who would become known as the Somerton Man was never identified in life, so everything we know about him comes from the examination of his body and belongings. He was found dead on Somerton Beach, just south of Adelaide, on the morning of December the 1st, 1948. Based on the medical examination, he was approximately 40 to 45 years old, about 5 feet 11 inches tall, with hazel eyes, ginger-colored hair that was graying at the temples, and a build that suggested he had been physically fit and well cared for. His hands showed no signs of manual labor. His calves were unusually well developed, as if he had been a dancer or perhaps someone who walked extensively on his toes. His teeth were in good condition, though he was missing several molars. He was clean-shaven. His fingernails were neatly trimmed. Everything about his appearance suggested someone who took care of himself, someone of at least moderate means, not a vagrant or transient. He was dressed in a white shirt, a brown knit pullover, a brown suit jacket, gray and brown trousers, socks, and shoes that were relatively new and well maintained. What was striking about his clothing was not what was there, but what was missing. Every single label had been carefully removed. The shirt had no maker's mark. The jacket had no tag. The trousers had been stripped of any identifying information, even the laundry marks that were common in that era. The small stamps or stitching that identified which dry cleaner or laundry service had processed the garments had been removed. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make sure this man could not be traced through his clothing. In his pockets, police found a few items, but nothing that identified him. There was a ticket stub from the Adelaide railway station, suggesting he had arrived by train, though from where remained unknown. There was a pack of chewing gum. There was an unused second-class railway ticket to Henley Beach. There was a bus ticket. There was an aluminum comb that had been manufactured in the United States. But there was no wallet, no identification papers, no money, no keys, no letters, nothing with a name on it. It was as if he had deliberately emptied his pockets of anything that might reveal who he was. Who was this man? Where had he come from? What had brought him to this beach? These questions would consume investigators for decades, and even now, more than 70 years later, we still do not have definitive answers. What we do know is that his death was not natural, or at least not entirely natural, and the circumstances surrounding it suggested something far more sinister than a simple heart attack or accident. The discovery of the body happened almost by chance. On the evening of November 30th, 1948, several people noticed a man lying on Somerton Beach. It was early summer in Australia, and the beach was a popular spot for evening strolls. Multiple witnesses saw the man lying with his head resting against a seawall, his legs extended, one arm bent at a right angle. He appeared to be sleeping, or perhaps drunk. No one thought to check on him more closely. Hours passed. The man did not move. The next morning, December 1st, more beachgoers noticed the body and realized something was wrong. Police were called and arrived to find the man dead. There were no obvious signs of violence, no blood, no wounds, no indication of a struggle. His appearance was neat and undisturbed, as if he had simply sat down, leaned back, and died peacefully. But the medical examination told a different story. The autopsy revealed that the man's stomach contents showed evidence of a recent meal, but more significantly, his internal organs showed signs consistent with poisoning. The spleen was enlarged, the liver was congested, and there were other indicators that suggested some kind of toxic substance had caused his death. However, despite extensive testing, no specific poison could be identified. The technology of 1948 could not detect every substance, particularly exotic poisons or drugs that left few traces. The pathologist concluded that the man had likely been poisoned, but could not determine what poison had been used or how it had been administered. This finding immediately elevated the case from a simple death investigation to a potential murder inquiry. Who was this man? And why would someone want him dead? The police began their investigation by trying to identify the body. His fingerprints were taken and checked against every database available in Australia. Nothing. They sent his prints to Scotland Yard in London, to the FBI in the United States, to other Commonwealth nations. Nothing. No match anywhere. They photographed his face and circulated the image to newspapers across Australia and eventually internationally. Thousands of people saw the photograph. No one recognized him. They checked missing persons reports from across the country. No one matching his description had been reported missing. It was as if he had materialized out of nowhere, lived long enough to die on that beach, and left behind no trace of his existence. Before we continue with what happened next, I need to pause here for a moment, because I know what you might be thinking right now. How is it possible that someone could just vanish like this, that their identity could be so completely erased? In our modern world of social media, surveillance cameras, and digital records, it seems impossible. But this case proves that even back then, with determination and planning, someone could become a ghost. And that's terrifying. I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever wondered how easy it would be to just disappear, to erase yourself so completely that no one could find you? This man did exactly that, whether by choice or because someone did it for him. If this case is making you think about identity, about how we're all just collections of records and memories, just type in the comments, "Identity is everything." Those three simple words. Because when you leave that comment, you're acknowledging how deeply unsettling this case is. You're joining a community of people who have been haunted by this mystery for decades, and you're helping others understand why this story matters. Thank you for being here. Now let's continue with what made this case go from mysterious to absolutely bizarre. The investigation seemed to be going nowhere when, several months after the body was found, a critical piece of evidence surfaced. A journalist covering the case had been pursuing various leads, and he learned about a suitcase that had been deposited at the Adelaide railway station's left luggage office. The suitcase had been checked in around the time the Somerton man would have arrived in Adelaide, and it had never been claimed. When police finally examined this suitcase, they found items that clearly belonged to the dead man. Inside were clothes, and just like the clothes on his body, every label had been meticulously removed. There was a stenciling brush of the kind used by merchant seamen. There were several pairs of trousers in different sizes, suggesting the man had recently lost weight. There was a screwdriver that had been modified, sharpened into what could be used as a weapon. There was orange thread that was identical to thread used to repair the trousers the man had been wearing when he died. But among all these items, the police found something that would change the entire direction of the investigation. Tucked into a hidden pocket of the suitcase was a scrap of paper that had been torn from a book. On this paper, printed in a distinctive typeface, were two words in Persian, "Tamam shud." The phrase means ended or finished, and it was immediately recognized by investigators as coming from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry that had been popular in English translation since the 19th century. These two words, Tamam Shud, appear on the very last page of the book, the final words of the entire collection. Someone had torn this page fragment from a copy of the Rubaiyat and placed it in the pocket of the dead man's trousers. The police now faced a new mystery. Why would someone carry the last words of a poetry book? Was it symbolic? Was it a message? And where was the rest of the book? The newspapers published stories about the Tamam Shud clue, appealing to the public for help. And incredibly, someone came forward with the actual book. A man reported that several months earlier, in the weeks after the body was found, but before the suitcase was discovered, he had found a copy of the Rubaiyat in his car, which he had left unlocked near Somerton Beach. The book had been tossed onto his back seat, and he had thought nothing of it at the time. But when he saw the news stories, he realized this might be connected. He brought the book to the police, and examination confirmed that the torn fragment found in the dead man's pocket had come from this exact copy. The book itself was a rare edition, an English translation published in New Zealand. But this was just the beginning of the strangeness. When police examined the book more closely, they found pencil marks on the back cover. Someone had written what appeared to be a code or cipher, 5 lines of seemingly random capital letters, with some letters crossed out. The code looked like this, though I'll describe it rather than write it exactly. A series of capital letters arranged in 5 lines, some letters appearing multiple times, some crossed through, no obvious pattern or meaning. Below this code, there was also a telephone number that had been written and then partially erased. The police traced the number to a woman who lived not far from Somerton Beach. Her name was Jessica Thompson, though that was not the name she had been using at the time. She later became known in the case as Jestin, her nickname. When police interviewed her, she claimed she had no knowledge of the dead man, had never seen him before, and could not explain why her phone number would be in his book. But witnesses noticed that when she was shown photographs of the deceased, she appeared shocked and distressed, as if she recognized him but was unwilling to admit it. She did acknowledge that during World War II, she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man she had known, an army officer, but she claimed that man was not the Somerton man, that he was someone else entirely, someone she had lost touch with. The police could never prove whether she was telling the truth or lying. Jessica Thompson took whatever she knew to her grave decades later, never revealing whether she had any connection to the mystery man. Thanks for sticking with this case so far. If you're finding this mystery as gripping as I do, just hit like and subscribe. It means the world. Now, here's where everything gets even stranger. The code found in the book became one of the most famous unsolved ciphers in history. Cryptographers, both professional and amateur, have spent decades trying to decipher it. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies reportedly took an interest, wondering if it might be a espionage-related cipher. Computer scientists have run it through every decryption algorithm imaginable, and no one has ever cracked it. Some experts believe it is not a code at all, but rather an acrostic or abbreviation, perhaps the first letters of words in a message or the initials of people's names. Others think it might be a one-time pad cipher, which is virtually unbreakable without the key. Still, others argue it could be random letters, meaningless scribbles that only appear to be a code. The problem is that the sample is too short for definitive analysis. With only 5 lines of text and no context, it is almost impossible to determine the method of encryption or whether encryption exists at all. The investigation into the Somerton man's identity continued for years. Police pursued countless leads. They investigated the possibility that he was a missing merchant seaman. Given the stenciling brush in his suitcase, they looked into whether he might be a European refugee or displaced person from World War II, someone who had come to Australia with forged or incomplete papers. They explored the espionage angle, wondering if he was a spy who had been eliminated by enemy agents. They checked dental records, but his unusual dental work did not match anyone in Australian files. They brought in experts to create a plaster bust of his face, which was displayed publicly in hopes someone would recognize him. Thousands of people viewed it. No one came forward with credible information. Over time, theories multiplied, but evidence remained frustratingly thin. Some investigators became convinced that Jessica Thompson knew more than she admitted, that she had been involved with the man romantically, or that he had come to Adelaide specifically to find her. Others believed the removed labels and the cipher pointed to espionage, that the man was a Soviet agent, or perhaps an American or British operative who had been caught up in Cold War intrigue. The exotic poison theory suggested a professional assassination, the kind carried out by intelligence services, but none of these theories could be proven. The case grew cold, not because investigators gave up, but because there was simply nowhere else to go. Every lead had been exhausted, every witness interviewed, every database checked. The Somerton man remained a cipher, as mysterious in death as he apparently had been in life. So who was the Somerton man? And why did he die on that beach in December 1948? Even now, more than 70 years later, we do not have definitive answers, though modern technology has finally begun to shed some light on the case. For decades, the prevailing theories fell into several categories, each with its own evidence and problems. The first and most romantic theory was that this was a case of espionage gone wrong. The late 1940s were the height of early Cold War tensions. Soviet intelligence was extremely active in Australia, recruiting agents, stealing secrets, monitoring Western military installations. The man's seemingly intentional erasure of his identity, the cipher, the possible poison, all fit the profile of a spy who had been caught. According to this theory, he might have been a Soviet agent eliminated by his own side for some failure or betrayal, or he might have been a Western operative killed by Soviet assassins. The theory gained credibility from the fact that known Soviet spies were active in Adelaide during that exact period. But there were problems with the spy theory. If intelligence agencies had killed this man, why leave the body in such a public place? Why allow the police to investigate at all? Professional intelligence services usually made bodies disappear completely or staged deaths to look like accidents or natural causes. The elaborate mystery surrounding the Somerton man seemed almost designed to attract attention, which is the opposite of what spies would want. Then there was the romantic suicide theory. According to this version, the man had been in love with Jessica Thompson, or perhaps another woman, and when that relationship ended or proved impossible, he had taken poison and deliberately positioned himself to die near where she lived. The Tamam Shud fragment, meaning finished, would be his final statement, a poetic way of saying his life was over. The removed labels would be explained by his desire to protect the woman from scandal, to prevent her name from being connected to his death. This theory has emotional appeal and explains some of the evidence, but it also has significant holes. If the man wanted to commit suicide, why do it in such an elaborate way? Why the coded message? Why the suitcase at the railway station? And why would Jessica Thompson react with such apparent shock and distress when shown his photo if she had known he was planning to kill himself. Some have suggested the man was a criminal who had been murdered by associates or rivals. The removed labels could indicate someone trying to hide from the law. The modified screwdriver in his suitcase could be a burglar's tool or a weapon. Perhaps he had stolen something or betrayed someone and was killed in revenge. But if this was a criminal matter, why was there no evidence of any crime he had committed? Why did his fingerprints not appear in any criminal database? Why the poetry and the cipher? Another theory suggests he was a private citizen, caught up in something he did not fully understand. Perhaps he had witnessed something he should not have, or unknowingly became involved in criminal or espionage activities. Perhaps the Rubaiyat book and its code were planted on him after his death to confuse the investigation and deflect attention from the real killers. This would explain the many contradictions in the evidence, but it requires accepting that someone went to extraordinary lengths to create a mystery around an otherwise ordinary death. In recent years, advances in DNA technology finally offered hope of solving the case. In 2021, researchers obtained DNA samples from the Somerton man's exhumed remains and began the process of genetic genealogy, the same technique that has been used to solve cold cases around the world. By 2022, a tentative identification was announced. According to the genetic analysis, the Somerton man was likely an electrical engineer named Carl Charles Webb, who was born in Melbourne in 1905 and would have been 43 years old at the time of his death. This identification, if correct, would answer the basic question of who he was, but it raises almost as many questions as it answers. If he was Carl Webb, why were all his labels removed? Why did no one report him missing? Why did his fingerprints not match any records? How did he end up on Somerton Beach? What was the code in the book? Was he involved in espionage or criminal activity? Or was he simply a man who, for reasons we may never understand, chose to erase his identity and die anonymously? And critically, the DNA identification has not been universally accepted. Some experts question the methodology and point out that genetic genealogy can sometimes produce false matches. The case technically remains unsolved, pending further confirmation. More than 7 decades have passed since that December morning when a man's body was found on Somerton Beach. The investigation that followed became one of the greatest embarrassments in Australian police history, not because they did not try, but because despite their best efforts, the man remained unidentified for over 70 years. The case became a symbol of how sometimes, no matter how much we investigate, no matter how many resources we throw at a problem, some mysteries resist solution. If the DNA identification is correct, and the man was indeed Carl Webb, then the mystery shifts from who was he to why did he do this? Why erase your identity so thoroughly? Why die in such a cryptic, theatrical manner? Why leave a code that cannot be solved? But if the DNA identification is wrong, if the Somerton man was someone else entirely, then we are back where we started. 7 decades of investigation, hundreds of theories, countless hours of work by dedicated investigators, and still no definitive answers. The man is buried in Adelaide, his grave marked with a headstone that reads only, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." The code has never been broken. The truth has never emerged. Justice, if there was a crime, has never been served. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some secrets go to the grave with the people who held them. This may be one of those cases. Thank you for listening to this frustrating, fascinating story. If you have thoughts about who the Somerton man really was, if you believe the DNA identification Or if you think there is more to discover, share your theories in the comments below. I read every comment, and I am genuinely curious what you think. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next case.